of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we wish to thank Khalid Fieri for his briefing. For several months now, the entire world has had the opportunity to observe the way that the United States has been continuing to deliberately foment tensions around the friendly nation of Venezuela under the pretext of combating drug trafficking and the terrorist threat, illegally destroying at the same time the civilian vessels in the Caribbean Sea. We, during the previous Security Council meeting, we all had an opportunity to see the fact that this artificial smoke screen is concealing the goal of U.S. military groups being shored up and the delivery of exerting tension on an independent state whose policy is not to the liking of Washington. It seems that the White House decided to remove from the mothballs the previously embraced practice of portraying combating terrorism as justification for blatant aggression and intervention in the affairs of sovereign states. And this time, the so-called foreign terrorist organization has been labeled as being the legitimate government of the Bolivarian Republic. Their attempts to convince us all of the mendacious view that decision of the U.S. authorities alone is enough in order to transform a sovereign state into a criminal enterprise, any acts of force against which can now be called a law enforcement operation and the defense of national interests. We see no point in delving on the absurd nature of the U.S. pseudo-legal methods, given how how significantly they fly in the face of international law and are inconsistent, especially given that in Washington themselves have sincerely recognized this. The statement of the U.S. President on the 16th of December does not need any additional interpretation. This is a direct claim on the natural wealth and the soil of another state, and an open, if not to state, flagrant bringing to bear of military, political, and economic pressure with the aim of changing an inconvenient regime. The United States is already shoring up their practices with attacks of open piracy with the aim of seizing sovereign natural resources, which we all saw compellingly taking place in recent weeks. We firmly condemn the seizure by U.S. troops of petroleum tankers and the effective imposition of a blockade on Venezuela. The acts by the U.S. side run counter to all key norms of international law, including the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, Security Council resolutions, and the Charter itself of the United Nations. Colleagues, the illegal U.S. blockade on the coast of Venezuela is the most clear and absolutely real act of aggression. And the responsibility of Washington is also evident for the catastrophic consequences of such cowboy-like conduct for the residents of the country, which is now blockaded. Unfortunately, we have every reason to believe that these are not one-off acts by the U.S. vis-a-vis Venezuela. This intervention, which is unfolding, can become a template for future acts of force against Latin American states in accordance with the so-called Trump corollary and the Monroe Doctrine, which was enshrined in the recently published U.S. national security policy. And this is a clear message for all countries in the region who are striving to conduct a sovereign policy and to independently determine their own economic, political, and cultural system. In Washington, they are ready to respect your independence and take your interests into account only if you are willing to tailor them to the interests of the United States and to conduct a policy which is convenient to and beneficial to them. As soon as you attempt to try to benefit your own people, then then you would be treated the same way that Venezuela is being treated. So don't ask for whom the bell tolls. The bell tolls for you. We reaffirm our solidarity with the Venezuelan people as they face the trials before them. We support the policy of the government of Mr. Maduro, which is geared towards the protection of the national interest and sovereignty of the homeland. We believe that all of those for whom international law is not mere noise have an obligation to stand with Venezuela. We note that Caracas has consistently demonstrated a willingness to engage in dialogue, to cooperate with Washington, both in terms of effectively coordinating acts for countering narcotics trafficking, as well as to combat real, not imagined terrorism. By all accounts, support for peaceful means of settling dispute and multilateral cooperation in these areas measures are something which are being advocated by all countries in the region, and yet, for some reason, for Washington, this is falling on deaf ears, and they are obstinately embracing their policy of destruction, which is fraught with grave consequences for the region and the world as a whole. We regret the fact that the new U.S. administration, which has been sober and pragmatic in its approach when it comes to other crisis situations, when it comes to Venezuela, it remains mired in approaches which itself actively criticizes. We trust that common sense will indeed prevail and that Washington will manage in time to halt, to prevent a fatal error which inevitably will undermine long-term U.S. national interests. The full-fledged armed conflict in Latin America, which remains for now a zone of peace, is the last thing that humankind needs right now. Humankind to whom President Trump promised an end to conflict. For now, unfortunately, the situation is not improving, and the United States, alas, continues to sow chaos in the Western Hemisphere, largely annihilating the benefits of the initiatives undertaken by the new U.S. leader and casting doubt on his sincere intentions in the global context. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
President, China appreciates Slovenia presidency for convening this emergency meeting requested by Venezuela and supported by Russia, China, and other countries. We thank ASD Chiari for his briefing. For some time now, under the pretext of combating drug trafficking, the United States have continued to increase its military deployment in the waters of the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. It has escalated sanctions, blockades, and military threats against Venezuela, and claimed to have sunk Venezuelan vessels, shot dead crew members, and seized oil tankers. It has designated the Venezuelan government as a foreign terrorist organization, claimed that Venezuela's territory, oil, and assets belong to the United States, and even threatened military strikes against the Venezuelan territory. The U.S. actions and the rhetoric have led to continued tensions in the region, raising serious concerns among regional countries and the international community. The UN Charter establishes fundamental principles governing international relations, including sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes. They constitute the cornerstone of international rule of law and are crucial for maintaining world peace and security. The U.S. actions seriously infringe upon other countries' sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, gravely violate the UN Charter and the international law, and threaten peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean. More and more countries in the region and beyond have voiced grave concern about and strong condemnation of the U.S. actions. We note that Secretary General Guterres has clearly stated the need for all countries to respect international law and the UN Charter, exercise restraint, and de-escalate tensions to preserve regional stability, and his readiness to play a mediation role to this end. China attaches importance to President Maduro's recent open letter. As an independent sovereign state, Venezuela has the right to independently develop mutually beneficial cooperation with other countries and defend its legitimate rights and interests, which should be respected and supported by the international community. China opposes all acts of unilateralism and bullying and supports all countries in defending their sovereignty and national dignity. We stand against any move that violates the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and infringes upon other countries' sovereignty and security, against the threat or use of force in international relations, against external interference in Venezuela's internal affairs under any pretext, and against illicit unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction that have no basis in international law or authorization by the Security Council. We call on the United States to heed the just call of the international community, immediately halt relevant actions, and avoid further escalation of tensions. We urge the United States to uphold the navigation safety of regional countries and the freedom and rights they enjoy under international law, to conduct normal law enforcement and judicial cooperation under bilateral and multilateral legal frameworks, to lift illicit unilateral sanctions, and to do more to promote peace, stability, and development in Latin America and the Caribbean. President, Latin America and the Caribbean constitute an important part of the Global South and are a vital force in maintaining world peace and stability and promoting global development and prosperity. China recently released its third policy paper on Latin America and the Caribbean, in which it reaffirms its support for the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace and the declaration of member states of the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. This fully demonstrates the high importance attached to and support for the region. China stands ready to work with countries in the region to strengthen solidarity and cooperation, uphold fairness and justice, and jointly safeguard peace and stability in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by stating and reiterating the United States does not recognize Nicolás Maduro or his cronies as the legitimate government of Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro is a fugitive from American justice and the head of the foreign terrorist organization Cartel de los Soles. In fact, Maduro and his regime stole the election, and the international community has the receipts. President Trump has been very clear that he is going to use the full power of the United States of America, the full might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels which have operated with impunity in our hemisphere for far too long, and everyone knows it. The single most serious threat to this hemisphere, our very own neighborhood, and the United States, is from transnational terrorist and criminal groups. These cartels are not like the mafia. These cartels are sophisticated, very technically capable, well-financed, and are wreaking havoc in our region. In its own 2025 World Drug Report, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime identified Venezuela as the key trafficking route in the entire Western Hemisphere for illegal drugs and for illegal narcotics and materials entering the United States and increasingly Europe. The United States will impose and enforce sanctions to the maximum extent to deprive Maduro of the resources he uses to fund Cartel de los Soles, which the United States has designated as a foreign terrorist organization along with Tren de Aragua. Important to this council meeting today, this includes profits from the sale of oil used to finance these cartels. The reality of the situation is that sanctioned oil tankers operate as the primary economic lifeline for Maduro and his illegitimate regime. The sanctioned tankers also fund the narco-terrorist group Cartel de los Soles. Maduro is responsible for trafficking, using these resources and using these profits into both the United States and Europe. And one has to ask, why have sanctions, either bilaterally, unilaterally, or backed by the international community, if they're not enforced? Well, the United States under President Trump is enforcing them in international waters. Otherwise, they are just empty words. Further, not only does Maduro's illegitimate regime openly cooperate and fund terrorist and criminal organizations, but it invites terrorist groups like Hezbollah, like the Iranian regime, militias like the ELN and FARC dissidents to operate openly within their territory, unimpeded and unencumbered. Maduro's ability to sell Venezuela's oil enables his fraudulent claim to power and his narco-terrorist activities. The people of Venezuela, frankly, deserve better. These people who have suffered under Maduro's socialist dictatorship. It is the action and policies of the illegitimate Maduro regime that pose an extraordinary threat to our hemisphere's peace and stability, and to that of the United States. The bottom line is whether it is physical attacks on our buildings and infrastructure, like we suffered on 9/11, or hybrid attacks, like flooding our country with criminals and deadly chemicals. The United States will do everything in our considerable power to protect our hemisphere, our borders, and the American people. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're grateful to the President for convening this meeting, and we're also grateful to Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and Pacific, Mohammed Khalid Kyari, for his detailed report on the situation that brings us together today. We acknowledge the attendance of the delegations of the countries of the